So welcome everyone. My name is Jamie Caribin. We'll be doing introductions just in a few minutes, but I wanted to welcome everyone for joining the City Hall Fellows Kickstart Your Local Government Career webinar. We're super excited to have folks join. We are all very passionate about local government, and we thought it would be a great opportunity to share sort of our own tips and perspectives on finding local government jobs, applying for them, and really starting off a career in what we think is a really, really great place to work, which is local governments all over the country. Just a few housekeeping items. So as many of you can probably tell, all attendees, so who are not hosts today, are muted by default. But with that said, we encourage questions from everyone who's joining, but please use the chat function at the bottom of your screen, and we will get to those during our Q&A later on in the program. For those who have RSVP'd and who previously submitted questions, thank you for sending those. We will try to address those throughout the presentation, but we're happy to answer them later on in Q&A. We also want to let you know that this webinar is being recorded. Part of that is so it's available for folks to reference later on. And a copy of the slides will also be available after the webinar.
Hey, Jamie.
Yes.
Your audio is just cutting out a little bit. Maybe if you adjust your mic slightly, it might be clearer.
Okay, thank you. Let me know if there is any issues, because I'll be speaking for a few more minutes here. Thanks, Thomas. So a quick introduction to City Hall Fellows. We are a nonprofit. We were originally founded in 2008 to support a direct placement of folks into local government positions. So it was very much like a cohort-based model. But in 2016, we sort of pivoted as a nonprofit, and we operate as we do in our current capacity, and that's to support really a professional network that attracts, grows, and retains what we believe is a new generation and workforce that believes in local government and that it's the most rewarding place to grow your career and really positively impact communities. The folks who are on this call, which we'll introduce in a few minutes, have all worked in local government. We all really believe that it's really a fruitful place to grow your career. Of course, meet your speakers. I introduced myself earlier. My name is Jamie Carubin. I work in public finance here in San Francisco. And you'll see that all of our speakers here today have really a wide variety and diversity of experience in local government. So I'm super excited that they all can join us. Also a fun fact, we are all board members of City Hall Fellows. So we are a very engaged, volunteer-based board that really works on all of the events and content that City Hall Fellows produces and supports. So I'll kick it off to Jen, who can introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jennifer Lee. I work for the City of Burlingame, which is a small municipality in the San Francisco Bay Area. And my job title is the Environmental Regulatory Compliance Coordinator, which basically just means that I make sure that the city is in compliance with environmental laws regarding the State Water Board and the city.
All right, hello. My name is Jessie Casella. I am currently based in Washington, D.C. I do not currently work in a local government, but I am a practicing attorney. I specialize in affordable housing law. I did work for the City and County of San Francisco in the Public Utilities Commission at the Legislative Affairs Department back in 2011, 2012. From there, I went right into law school at the University of California at Hastings, which I'll talk a little bit about later. And as I mentioned, I currently practice affordable housing law.
Thomas, I think you're up.
Hey, My name's Thomas Gonzalez. I currently work for a private real estate developer, Carmel Partners, and we build apartment buildings around the country. But previously, I've also worked for local and regional government, including the city and county of San Francisco, and I've also worked at a nonprofit. So I have a little bit of experience across the range of sectors.
Hi, and I'm Kelsey Vaughn. I currently work as a development manager for a nonprofit in the Bay Area. But previously, I worked for the city and county of San Francisco for the San Francisco Public Library. Yeah.
Hi, everyone. My name is Michael Cox. I am a performance analyst at BART in their sustainability group. So I do data analysis on sustainability projects. And prior to that, I was a performance analyst at San Francisco MTA. And I'm also the events coordinator for the board. And if you have any questions, please send them to me in the chat throughout the meeting.
And hi, everyone. My name is Marie Valdez. I was a City Hall Fellow in the cohort of 2015-2016 with Kelsey. That year, I worked as a fellow in the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission. I then spent the next 3 years in the mayor's office, working in the budget office. And I am currently working at the Department of Police Accountability in San Francisco as a budget manager.
Great. Thank you all for introducing yourselves. And as you all can see, we have government and continuing local government, but in sort of various capacities, which I think is really, really interesting and super helpful for this webinar. To go over the agenda today, so really we have about 3 sort of subject areas. The bulk of the conversation will really be under our first topic, which is the sort of strategies and tips for applying and interviewing for local government jobs. We're going to be using San Francisco as a case study because it's the sort of process and system that frankly we're most familiar with, but it should be very similar to other jurisdictions. We'll talk about kind of what it's like to apply for local government jobs in other jurisdictions other than San Francisco, and share some other job searching resources with you all. And many of the questions that we received before the webinar also touched points on sort of transition periods of preparing for grad school or really building skill sets for local government positions. But also if local government isn't the exact path that folks take for public service, sort of what are other experiences that we've had with working with local governments, but not necessarily directly for local government. So that's really to kind of keep your public service options open. So again, we're using applying for a local government job in the city and county of San Francisco sort of as a case study. I do want to say, for full disclosure, the folks that are on this webinar are acting really in their own individual capacities. You know, we have applied for local government jobs. Many of us work for local governments here in San Francisco, but we in no way represent those respective departments. We do not respect the Department of Human the Department of Human Resources. And you know, there are various civil service rules that we do need to follow. And so this is really just an advice sort of webinar for folks who are interested in looking to apply to local government positions. So the first kind of question is, how the heck do you start, right? A lot of people submitted questions on where do I start? So I'm going to kind of walk you through the Department of Human Resources website and sort of give you a sense of how I think is, and how folks think here on this panel sort of is the most strategic way to start the process. So I'm just going to stop. I'm actually going to open up the DHR website first.
Hey, Jamie.
Yeah.
While you do that, I was wondering, maybe it would work better with your phone audio. I think a couple of us are still, we hear you most of the time, but then it's not the best.
Oh, okay. How about, thanks, Thomas.
Or maybe like a different microphone.
How about this? Does
Keep
that
talking.
sound better?
It does. Oh yeah, that sounds much better.
Okay, great.
Oh, there we
Thank
go.
you. Thanks for doing that. I actually don't have my phone on me, so if you're texting me, sorry. So again, just to kind of jump back to the Department of Human Resources website, many local government jurisdictions will have websites like this. This is not going to be the exact same for cities, but for San Francisco, this is our website. And when you go to sfdhr.org, it'll take you to landing pages where you can choose this job seekers tab that will take you directly to job opportunities for the city and county of San Francisco. And when you scroll all the way down, these sort of postings are essentially job postings that folks can apply to. So when you're searching for a job, you could either go directly to this landing page, and if any of these postings really speak to you in terms of the subject matter and the department, definitely, go ahead and apply directly to those. You'll see in this first column here, there's a lot of numbers and titles. These numbers are called classifications in San Francisco. And I think one of the most strategic ways to go about really finding opportunities is to set what do we call email notifications for certain classifications. So the question is, how do you actually get to understand which classifications you're a part of or that you qualify for? So I'm just going to go back to this email or this web page, and there is a.
And actually, just on that, are folks seeing the website?
No, we're not. Oh, you're not. I'm sharing my screen. That's really, really odd.
It might be just sharing the one window. You might need to reshare.
Oops.
Yeah, we're looking at the PowerPoint.
Oh, I'm sorry about that. Let me share this. How about that?
Perfect.
Yes.
Thank you. So sorry to go back. I was looking at this first landing page. This is where job opportunities are posted. This first column here is what I was referring to as what is the classifications. So you could directly apply for jobs through this, clicking these links here. It'll take you to a job application site. But as I was mentioning, it is sort of difficult to figure out which classification would I qualify for. And so if you go to, you go to this second tab here, there's something called a classification and compensation database. And many jurisdictions have classifications as well. And typically it's kind of a wonky number that's attached to the class of the job, and the class meaning the number of years of experience it takes to enter that class, but also it typically correlates with salary. So there are certain classifications that are for folks who are younger, right out of college, to managerial classifications that are for folks who have been in the workforce for several years. What I'm just going to use this 1822 as an example. And I'm just going to say, okay, well, I'm going to search for and see if I apply or if I qualify for this certain classification. And you can type in any classification here. There's also a manual down below where you can download the PDF and read about all these hundreds of classifications. And I say this because each classification correlates, like I said, with work requirements. And so I'm going to pull up, for example, this 1822 classification description. And for every classification in San Francisco, there is a corresponding definition of that classification, an example of the types of duties that class performs. as well as, which we'll get to a little bit later, as well as what is required for you to enter into that classification. And this all sounds very wonky, but it's really critical to sort of understanding whether your application will move forward to the next interview round or the next review round from a human resources standpoint. So this is all to say that if you're new to local government, I think the first step is really looking to see sort of which classifications you qualify for, and then doing some research by reading what those thresholds are. And then in San Francisco, there's a notify me when a job opens up in this specific classification. And that is helpful, so you're not always perusing the website, but you'll actually get an email anytime a job that you would qualify for becomes open. This is a little tricky because this is, like I said, based off of a classification requirement. It's not filtered through a subject matter or a specific department. So for example, I don't believe you can set notifications for jobs that open up specifically in the Department of Public Health, for example. And the reason is because the city and many cities don't necessarily have specific classifications for a specific department or role. So Department of Public Health won't have its own set of 1800s, and then the police department won't have a different set of different numbers. It's really a certain class of a job that could operate across many departments, whether it's the Department of Public Health, whether it's the Public Utilities Commission, and so on. So it's not very subject matter or department specific. I'm going to switch over to my other PowerPoint. And so if you do get to that step and you do set email notifications, you will get a more steady stream of these job opportunities, which I think it would be really helpful. An important thing on time. The timing of applying for jobs can be local government jobs can be very frustrating for some folks because you feel like you're sending applications out into this sort of black box and you don't really hear back. A lot of that is really driven by the fact that applying for local government jobs are driven and really governed by what we call the civil service rules. So there's a very strict rule and rubric of things that staff and human resources needs to follow when they are looking for candidates and when they're reaching out to candidates and when they're interviewing candidates. It can take several weeks. So I will say, just kind of as a heads up, please allow, somewhere between 3 to 6 months to really get through the process of applying for a job, interviewing job, and then eventually getting to the job offer process. It's not like a 2 to 3 week process that folks sort of have experienced in the private sector. So it's important to just allow yourself some time. There are some exceptions to more of an expedited way of getting hired with local governments like San Francisco, and I can speak to some of those exceptions, but generally it does take some time. So please do build that in. Oops. Great. So over the next few slides, I'm going to talk about this concept of minimum qualifications. So when I was using, when I pointed to that 1822 minimum sort of classification description, down below, as I pasted here, there was a description of experience and training, and that's what we refer to as minimum qualifications. I'm going to speak about this for several minutes just because it's really the most important thing, I think, in really grasping and understanding as you're looking and applying for local government jobs. It's really the step that folks, I think, miscalculate when they're applying to local government jobs that really prohibit them from moving to the next review step. And it all seems very obvious, but I think it's worth it to sort of describe and really provide advice around this piece here. So when you're looking and applying for a job, and let's just say you find a job that's really interesting, that, for example, it's here, it's an 1822 administrative analyst. Again, it could be for any department, but let's use Department of Public Health, for example. When you first apply and you do submit your application, the first sort of step that the Department of Human Resources will often look at is whether or not you fulfill the minimum qualifications for that job. And that's really built off of sort of two pieces. The first is education experience, and then the second is qualifying work experience. The one thing I will say that I really appreciate about local government sort of job application processes is that it's really built in this sort of blinding effect of not necessarily hiring folks who went to fancy schools or who went to schools that folks automatically kind of get jobs for. It's really grounded in do you have a baseline of qualifying educational experience, and then more so do you have relevant work experience? So I think it's sort of an equalizer in that way, which is really fair, and I appreciate that as part of the process. But it does sort of lend itself to a more rigorous look into those qualifications. So I highlighted two pieces here. The first is saying, so in order to qualify to even move forward with this job application, we need to confirm that you could have, you meet one of these, really it's one of these four requirements. I'm using the third one as an example. I'm saying, okay, well, I don't have a master's degree, so I have a bachelor's degree. And do I have a bachelor's degree? And then it says 2 years of full-time equivalent experience performing professional level analytical work, and described in note A. So I could say, okay, great. Well, I definitely have a BA, so that's checked off. But do I have 2 years of equivalent work experience? And typically, the answer is, yeah, sure, I could, I've worked for several years. They likely qualify under these buckets here. That's in note A. So I should be able to move on to the next round. And that's not always the case. And the primary reason is it comes down to exactly how you describe your qualifying professional level analytical experience. So let's just take, looking at note A, this box here, let's just take a complex budget analysis as an example. So you could say in your work experience that you've built financial pro formas on revenues and expenses for your company. And that, in my opinion, qualifies as complex budget analysis, right? However, somebody who might be reading it or screening it from a human resources standpoint can't necessarily make that judgment call that a pro forma means complex analysis, right? So my suggestion would be, as you're writing your application and you're saying, for X number of years I worked at this company, there's going to be a little box where you write sort of and you describe what it is that you did at that company. I would try to stick to the language that's in this posting and under the minimum qualifications as closely as possible to best describe the work that you've done. So I would say, using the pro forma example, I built a pro forma model, financial pro forma model to contribute, or that demonstrated complex budget analysis. So I would use that sort of language to better describe the type of work that you did And that way, as HR is screening this, they can look at the number of years you were at that company, and they can look at how you described your work, and they can know that it exactly fits within the parameters and the language of this Note A. So it really is a bit of an art and a science when you're applying and sort of describing the work that you do. Another comment I'll make is that a lot of folks, when they're describing their work experience in prior work placements, is they try to, as we all do, want to make a good impression and write, sort of complex sentences, and sort of be impressive in that way as a job applicant. I would, it sounds pretty strange to say this, but I would sort of take that concept and sort of put it aside for a bit and really think about how best you can describe your past work experience, not sort of with a complex language, but try to use, sort of mirror that description as best you can under this language under Note A. So if you could say that you did complex budget analysis, that you did development administration, that you did complex contracts agreements, and really try to mirror the language as best you can, that's gonna be all the more helpful for HR to say, okay, great, I'm gonna check that box, that year of work definitely qualifies. In no way am I saying sort of fabricate what you did in your prior jobs. I'm just saying there's a better way of sort of phrasing what you did in prior jobs. I will also say, in terms of number of years, so this is looking at 2 years of full-time experience, they're going to be looking for, as HR will be looking for, as you describe your past work experience, that you have at least 2 years, equivalent of 1,040 hours per year, that demonstrates the exact work that's under Note A. So kind of moving on to using another example. So say you don't have 2 years of qualifying work experience, you actually only have 1 year, you're just out of college, you just maybe finished the fellowship program or post-grad program, and you do have a BA. So maybe you fit under really category 4, where you have a BA, you have 1 year of equivalent work experience, but you also got your bachelor's degree in a qualifying major under Note B. So let's just say that this 1822 position, for example, is in finance at the Department of Public Health. They're going to be looking for a specific major, your specific bachelor's degree, to see if it fits within certain categories that would be helpful for this position. So you'll see here they're looking for a bachelor's degree in either business management, business law, finance, statistics, anything sort of that fits within these categories. Now, unfortunately, if you are a biology major, this might not necessarily benefit you because it doesn't fit within these categories. And that's something I would say is sort of the unfortunate piece of it. It doesn't, just because you're a biology major, it doesn't necessarily mean that you wouldn't be qualified for this job. The one thing that I will suggest to folks is that you don't take, if somebody says, oh, you know what, you actually don't fit under the qualification number 4 because you were a biology major, I would try to take the next step further and maybe provide your coursework from your college that showed that you actually took classes that could fit within some of these categories here. So if you took a stats class, if you took a finance class, but you happen to be a science major, I think that may help. And it's definitely always helpful to provide more information and really establish some communication with human resources to kind of put your best foot forward. And that's why the last piece is, when all else fails, follow up with your HR analyst. That's tied to the job posting. it's you know, every job posting has a human resources analyst attached to them and responsible for each job position. And it's really their job to answer questions. So I wouldn't be shy of emailing them or giving them a call and really trying to get past this first sort of phase of qualifying. So really, you know, the whole kind of struggle with looking for local government positions is getting to the interview, right? Sometimes you never make it past the first round and you're like, what the heck happened? Where did what went wrong as part of my application? And so I'll sort of touch on that, sort of the different phases of applying for local government jobs. The first column here kind of speaks to the sort of stringent way I was describing how a person should submit their job applications. The real goal is to confirm that you meet the qualifying minimum qualifying qualifications for the job. That's the only way you're going to be able to move forward with next steps to eventually get a position with a city. So if the goal is to confirm that you have minimum qualifications, you should try to do the best you can in terms of as you're submitting your work experience and you're saying I worked at these places during these times, as you describe again that work experience, try to align it as best you can with the language under the minimum qualifications in the posting. So again, try to mirror that language as close as you can. The number of years of experience is really important. So if you do, if you are, out of college and you did have maybe not full years, but you have worked in internships here and there, maybe 3 or 4 months, during the summer, I would still try to include that. And, to the extent that you can piece those together to equal 1,040 hours, sometimes the Department of Human Resources will take that as qualifying experience based off of the type of work you did during those internship programs. It goes to say that also for your resume. So, the job portal itself, you submit your work experience, but your resume is also another piece of information they ask you to upload. And as many of us who have written resumes, we try to make them sound simple. We try to make them look clean. I will say that in my experience, I have a regular resume that I send to folks, and I have a resume that I submit as part of local government job applications. And again, the language in the resume mirrors very closely with the language that's under minimum qualifications. And it's all for the reason of trying to ensure that I'm communicating that I meet the qualifying minimum qualifications. If you do get past that first screening, you'll often get a second sort of step to either take a civil service exam, or sometimes part of the screening is to actually submit supplemental questionnaires. So I'll start with the supplemental questionnaires first. I've seen supplemental questionnaires in job postings that are actually really simple. Sometimes they ask you to check boxes. So for example, if the work experience requires you to have management experience for at least 1 year, one of the supplemental questions could very well say, do you have experience being a manager? If so, how many years? And if you don't click, at least 1 year, and you click, or say it's 3 years and you only click 2 years, you won't get past to the next round. And that's just really for easy screening. I've seen supplemental questionnaires that ask for you to more so describe your work experience. So kind of going back again, if it's complex budget analysis that you've done in previous jobs, you're going to have to describe that in a supplemental questionnaire. It's to again, use that same language, but really build upon what you did and how that analysis was complex. And I say that because a lot of sort of long form response supplemental questionnaires sometimes serve in lieu of an interview. So if you do get a long form one, I would try my best to make sure that they touch on the points of the minimum qualifications, but also try to be as explicit and detailed as you can. Civil service exams is another part of the process, and this is often tied to positions that are what we call permanent civil service positions, or PCS positions. These are sort of protected positions. So in the case that there could be budgetary constraints, that we see today, and these positions are specifically protected from certain layoffs. And it's a really great, part of working for the government is that there's a sense of job security. With that, you do get more sort of stringent rules as you're applying for these types of jobs. And one of them is to typically take an exam. So using the 1822 example, if you are taking an 1822 exam, one thing to note is that sometimes exams, when you go there in person, can actually apply to multiple positions. So folks have told me they went to take an exam and there was like 150 people there, which is a little scary. And so just be aware that there could be one exam for multiple openings. For folks who have taken exams, one helpful tip is that sometimes your score can actually apply to many other types of classifications, depending on how well you scored. And so before you keep taking exams, I would ask HR whether or not you have existing examinations that can qualify you for other job opportunities. And then when you get to the interview process, again, kind of the name of the game is to always confirm that you qualify for the role. And so a lot of the interview questions, if folks have not yet or have had experiences interviewing for local government, they can be pretty wonky. You go to a local government interview and it's not the same as a private sector interview where you maybe have a coffee with somebody. It's pretty, it can feel very regimented, and I think a lot of that is because there are specific questions and they are looking for specific types of answers. And that's to make sure that they are really scoring and judging the candidate from a fair standpoint of, do they meet these qualifications, not necessarily do I like this person, right? And that sometimes can be a little strange with the interview process. So it's really important to answer the question in its entirety. Sometimes there's multi-part questions that can be kind of wonky, but it's also very, very important for you to communicate your answer explicitly, to the degree that, if they're asking for an example, you provide a specific example, and your example should touch components of the minimum qualifications that the posting had previously outlined. And so they're looking for keywords, they're looking for key phrases, and a lot of that is there is a scoring rubric that is a requirement for a panel to say, did the candidate say these words? So it can feel a little strange, and often follow-up questions are not allowed because this is governed by a civil service process. So it can feel very strange, and so don't kind of be fazed by that. Know that that's the process for everyone, and really try and tie every answer, every detail you provide with what's the minimum qualifications from the job posting. Last thing I'll say is if the position is exempt, so if it's a temporary exempt position or a TEX position or a permanent exempt position or a PEX position, the interview process might not be as stringent. So you might get a nod, you might get a follow-up question, and that's because the rules for that specific interview are not as strict because the classification in the job itself doesn't sort of meet a threshold of protection, again, from like a union standpoint. The higher protected the job is, so the PCS position I was mentioning, the more stringent and strict the rules will be to actually obtain that job. So if you have an exempt, if you get an exempt job interview, you're going to get a little bit less of kind of those rule following components to the interview. I know there's probably a ton of questions on this, but for the sake of time, I'm just going to keep moving forward. We'll get to them during Q&A. How am I doing on time? We good? I don't have my watch. Okay, great. Oops. So a lot of questions we received was the impact of COVID-19 on just, this sector themselves, and specifically even with San Francisco. What does COVID mean, and what do budgetary constraints mean for future job opportunities with local governments? I'm not in the mayor's budget office. I do work in a finance capacity with San Francisco. And if, as folks have read, local governments like San Francisco are going through pretty hard budgetary constraints where we're sort of rearranging the budget. And really what that means is that there's going to be fewer positions for departments to really justify filling. So these are positions that have already been created from a budgetary standpoint, and they were theoretically out, should have been sort of out and published for folks to apply to. They're kind of taking a step back and looking at how much that's going to actually cost to fill those positions. So there's been a pause on that. What that means is that there's just fewer positions and fewer opportunities for folks to fill. Likewise, it's going to be pretty difficult to create new positions, so to grow the workforce. Had it been a good budgetary time that really warrants the creation of new positions, it's really the opposite. So there's just fewer dollars to go around and a harder case to make to add new jobs, just knowing that that's going to be sort of a long-term financial commitment for the city. So there's just fewer opportunities there. This is not to say that there are no jobs anymore and that folks are going to cut back. It's just to say that there's just going to be fewer opportunities than what would otherwise be in a good economic situation. For folks who are looking for jobs, I will say there are certain departments we call non-general fund departments in San Francisco that could be still creating positions. So these are departments that create their own revenue and are sort of self-financed. I called them here revenue generating departments. And that just means that they're separate from the city's general fund sort of budget constraints. So think, using the Public Utilities Commission for example, they have their own rate base, they collect their own revenue, therefore they sort of finance their own operations. So job prospects at a department like the PUC, which has its own revenue generating mechanism, is probably more likely than a department like the Department of, I'm trying to think of a general fund department, like the public library, for example. So that's it for me. I'm going to kick it over to Jen to take on the next few slides.
Thanks, Jamie. Good evening, everyone. Again, my name is Jennifer Lee, and I used to work for the City and County of San Francisco, and I now work for the City of Burlingame. And I'm here to talk about my experience for working for a municipality outside of San Francisco. So first off, the civil service process will always guide the job application process. And here are some tips that can help you with your job application based on my experience from not only applying to jobs, but as well as serving as an interviewer on a panel. Number one, proofread your application and cover letter. That should go without saying, but you'd be surprised at how many typos I've seen on cover letters and resumes that just leave a bad first impression. And also, oftentimes, it can be easy for the hiring manager to spot when someone has just copied and pasted a previous cover letter and just changed the name of the job title that they're applying for. So if you can spend some extra time customizing your documents by looking at the keywords that are used in the job application, that would show that not only have you read the application, the job description, but that you have the relevant skills to do the job. Number two, most of the job applications will include a form for you to type your responses in, such as your previous job responsibilities for each job you've had, as well as provide an opportunity to attach your resume, which can seem redundant. However, I wouldn't encourage you to bypass that first step by using the phrase, "see resume for details," because that just doesn't leave a good first impression if not a lot of effort was put into the application. And lastly, if there are supplemental questions, I highly recommend you to take the time to answer those questions thoroughly. These questions have been specifically included to the job application by the hiring manager, so you know that they're really going to pay close attention to the responses provided in these questions. And so a way to strengthen your responses would be to include specific examples with measurable deliverables. The hiring manager is basically looking for someone who can actually do the job, because they want, they're filling a vacancy. So they want whoever's in that role to be able to hit the ground running, ideally, with minimum training. That would be the ideal scenario, right? And so if you can demonstrate that you can do the job because you've already performed XYZ in your current role, state that in your application. I would probably put that in the supplemental questions, because that's where they're probably going to spend more time looking at. And so that would go a long way. Now, if you currently are in a role where you don't have that skill set, or maybe you haven't done that specific duty that they're looking for, then I would talk about any transferable skills that allow you to demonstrate that you could do the job if you were given the opportunity. So maybe you haven't done it because you just haven't been in that position, but you can talk about skills that are related to that duty that would still allow you to succeed if you got the position. So next, I will talk about the resources I use to find my current role. So these are just some of the resources available. I want to call out the first two, CalOps and governmentjobs.com. These are two major search engines that are basically like the Indeed.com, if you will, for public sector employment. CalOps, as the name suggests, lists only California-specific public sector opportunities. And many public agencies in California, especially smaller agencies, don't have the bandwidth or the resources to create their own website like the San Francisco Human Resources Department does. So they post their jobs on this website only. And so just like with the San Francisco DHR website, you can also opt in to receive email notifications from CalOps by just creating a free account. And governmentjobs.com is another great search engine. It is nationwide, and some jobs are posted on both of these sites. So I would just check both of them just to cover your bases when you're job searching. And as always, we do encourage you to get involved with professional networks in the area. And two examples include the Municipal Managers Association of Northern California and the International City County Management Association. And as we mentioned previously, we'll be sharing the slides after this webinar, so you can take the time to go through each of these links at your own leisure. And with that, I'll hand it over to Jesse Casella, who will kick off our discussion about graduate school.
All right, thanks, Jen. So we got, as Jamie mentioned, we got a lot of questions about folks who are considering grad school programs. and a variety of grad school options out there. As Jamie was talking about earlier as well, possession of a graduate degree can also help you get a local government position. If you looked at the minimum qualifications, instead of doing some brain damage on how many hours you have relevant experience, some of those options also included a master's degree or a law degree. So sometimes that can be a helpful path as well. As I mentioned earlier, I worked for the city right out of undergrad. I then went from the city to law school and have been practicing law since then. So I'll briefly talk about law school, and then I'll turn it over to Thomas to talk about other options. There's a variety of paths. I don't want to make it seem like there is only one path and only one time to go to grad school. A question that I get often is, I do want to go to grad school. I'm not sure when. I emphasize to folks that there is not a right answer. It really just depends on where you are in your life, what you want, now, when you feel ready. So that's, I think, first and foremost, an important thing to consider. Don't go now simply because you feel like you have to. Go when you think you are mentally ready, particularly for law school, which is a full-time job, if not more than a full-time job. And kudos to many of my classmates that did law school and had families and other jobs and things like that. I personally can't fathom that. So that's the strong recommendation to just really consider what you're jumping into before you jump into it. But that said, there are certainly pros and cons for, going right out of local government or waiting to get a little bit more life experience. Going right out of local government, certainly if you want to practice law in local government, I think that's a very helpful transition from local government to law school. Theoretically, you might have more time or energy to be able to take on something that is as massive as law school. On the other hand, less life experience may make it a little bit more challenging, to go through law school. I personally think that, I only had a year of experience before I went to law school in local government. And I think, I certainly survived that, but I think it's hard. And I often tell folks it's hard to learn property law if you don't know, what a mortgage is, or you don't own a house, right? It's not impossible to be able to do that, but certainly I went to school with many classmates that had more life experience and things, sometimes that just makes more sense, that life experience can help make it a little bit easier as well. And I also want to emphasize there are plenty of local government job opportunities that do use law degrees. One example of that is a city attorney's office. I know in San Francisco, the city attorney's office is one of the largest in the country, and there are many other local governments that have large city attorney offices. Those city attorneys are tasked with advising various local government departments on a variety of legal matters. Some of those can be things like legislation before the Board of Supervisors. Some of those can be, what the ADA accessibility requirements are for a, water fountain. And those all run the gamut of, interesting tasks and things that certainly any city, but particularly any large city needs to have adequate legal representation. So that's, a really helpful, avenue as well. I interned at the city attorney's office while I was in law school and was able to apply what I had learned working in city government on the non-legal side. I was then able to, I think that made me more informed and a better legal advocate when I was in the city attorney's office, because I knew what the programmatic folks, generally were encountering. How city government worked really helped me. And now I don't work in local government right now, but I advise many developers and nonprofits in particular that work very closely with city governments in the affordable housing world, you can't get affordable housing built without some kind of government support, funds, things like that. So we often collaborate with local governments. And I, again, feel like my experience in local government makes me a better advocate for my clients because I can understand the challenges and sometimes bureaucracy of how government works. I think makes it easier as well. So I will turn it over to Thomas.
Thanks, Jesse. Just again, my name's Thomas Gonzalez. I work for Carmel Partners, which is a real estate developer that builds apartment buildings around the country, headquartered here in San Francisco. And I have a master's in city planning. So I think it's funny because I considered all 5 of the grad programs listed here, including public administration, public policy, business school, law, as well as city planning. I think I would just echo a lot of the stuff that Jesse said. When you're thinking about timing for grad school, don't be afraid to give it a couple of years. You probably will get more out of it, or if you're able to bring some experience into it. And it can help you, qualify for jobs. But I would also say that just consider very carefully because you don't necessarily have to go to grad school, and it is a huge trade-off in terms of it's several years usually of time and wages that you won't be able to earn. So when you're thinking about your career, there's a big trade-off. So you definitely, if you do decide to go, apply for all the scholarships you can. Try to make it work, because I know for law schools, a lot of my friends who went to law school, they end up having to work or they work in like a corporate job for several years just to kind of pay off the costs of the program. So that could potentially be a challenge if you're trying to work in public service. Although there are some programs that can help with that as well. The good news is there's depending on what your job is, what job you want, there's a lot of flexibility in these different programs. There's plenty of folks in local government who have business degrees, and I think they can be very helpful. And obviously public policy or public administration are super applicable. I would talk to people who are in jobs that you find interesting, that are older, and figure out, did they have a master's degree? What did they get a master's degree in? Or would they have, if they could do it again, would they get a master's degree in a particular area? If you really know exactly what you want to do, that probably makes this question easier. But yeah, there's a lot of options. So what I was going to say, I guess that's probably it. Should I keep going, or since private sector's here, the first one up?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. So yeah, I work in the private sector now, and if some of you guys may work in the private sector right now. I think I actually work. So I work more on the business side with managing buildings, and so I actually interact less with city government now than I thought I would. But that's I also think that's a really valuable experience, and a lot of folks in city government value some private sector experience because you just learn things, and the industry that I work in is highly regulated by city government, and so for people who are trying to enforce rules or make rules, oftentimes it's helpful if they understand the people who are going to have to follow those rules and how their businesses work. So it can be super valuable, and you just again, talking to folks and doing research can help you figure out how to talk about the transferable skills when you do want to move into a local government role. And while you're working in the private sector, there's a lot of opportunities. Obviously, I'm on the City Hall Fellows Board, so that's a way that I stay involved in public service and social impact. And a lot of professional organizations or companies themselves, through their corporate social responsibility initiatives, also offer ways to still be involved and partner with public service initiatives. So yeah.
And hi again, I'm Kelsey. And I after I worked for government, I actually transitioned over to the nonprofit world. And for me, I also really have found it a fulfilling alternative to working in local government. What really drives me about it is that it's mission oriented, and I still get to perform that piece of giving back to the public good. So I would encourage everyone who is interested in public service to look into nonprofits where you're interested in the work that they're doing. And additionally, too, there are a number of nonprofits that work in advocacy and even are connected with local government that support local government operations. So if that's something you're really passionate about as well, I encourage you to explore that. And then two, even if you are working in the private sector, nonprofit sector, you can always keep your options open for coming back to local government. So I personally stayed on a lot of lists for those local government jobs, just to keep my options open. And when the right position would come along or that I'd be interested in interviewing for, I had that option to come back if I wanted to. So stay connected, keep your options open, and yeah. I think that's really the best thing you can do.
Yeah, I'll just, if I could just add one more thing, because I've also worked in nonprofit, but I just think either private or nonprofit can be a great way to, get training or build your skills, even if you can't find the perfect job in city government, which I think is was sort of my route was, I'm really interested in transportation and real estate development, and there's very few roles in that, and a lot of them require a lot of experience. So I'm still open to potentially, if I find a great role in city government where I can work on those, on that type of project, then it's something I still feel that I could move into on the city side.
So I think with that, we know we have a lot of questions that probably came through. Thanks, Thomas and Jen and Jesse and Kelsey, for your insights. I'm going to turn it over to Michael, who's been sort of gathering all of the questions that have come through over the past hour or so, and then maybe we can just jump into those questions.
Yeah, great. Thank you all for submitting questions. We'll try to get to as many as we can. So the first one that we got from Sergio Velasquez was, what is the motivation behind the work that you do? What do you believe is more important, getting your foot in the door or waiting to land your dream job?
I can probably start with that. And then other folks definitely feel free to chime in. I think it really depends on kind of where you are in your career. For me, in my own experience, if it wasn't working for local government and really being able to work on the projects and the people that I currently work with, I wouldn't really know what my dream job was, right? And I think a lot of us, have sort of a concept of what we really want to do, but it's really hard to conceptualize what is out there. Like, what do people actually do for work? And working in local government and working across, over 50 departments in the various capacities that I've been working in with, was really an eye-opening experience for me to figure out kind of what were the nooks and crannies of local government that I actually found exciting that would then result in my dream job. So, when I first started working for local government, I was a City Hall Fellow. That was sort of my first entry into getting my feet wet. And that really helped, sort of that foot in the door concept really helped me discover the departments and sort of the other capacities in which what makes up local government, to help me sort of find what is very close to my dream job now. I started working in public finance for the Public Utilities Commission. And then I started working on sort of larger bond finance projects citywide, anything ranging from affordable housing development to transportation to public health facilities. And now I work specifically, I work for the Treasure Island Development Authority, and we're building basically a new mini city over on Treasure Island. And so I get to work on affordable housing, transportation, behavioral health clinics, infrastructure, sea level rise adaptation, sort of you name it. And if it weren't for those previous experiences, I don't think I could have really landed this dream job. So when you first start, it kind of feels like a compromise, but you're really building the skill set and the knowledge and the connections and the understanding of what it is that would actually be a dream job for you. Yeah.
I would also say, really, it depends on your situation, and you need to consider your options and your alternatives. If you, if you're just getting started and you don't have that many options, then just, take whatever seems best and do get your foot in the door. It is an opportunity to build your skills, your credibility, because your dream job, isn't usually going to fall in your lap. Usually they're going to want to, see that you've proven your ability to, work and perform well. And so getting your foot in the door is that chance to prove yourself and all this stuff Jamie said. And also, like, if you considering waiting around for something, what are you doing right now? If you really like what you're doing now, but maybe it's fine to wait a few years until you do find something great. But if you're maybe not feeling fulfilled or not getting great learning opportunity in your current role, then maybe take something that doesn't quite seem perfect, but is a good opportunity to learn more or get within the organization you want to be at.
I'll also emphasize too, one of the benefits to, getting your foot in the door is that you can also meet the right people and find the right support system, even if it isn't necessarily in an area that you envision yourself, being in for, your entire career. I worked at the Public Utilities Commission. I had an interest in energy efficiency and water and sewer issues, but that is, not what I work on now. Now I work on affordable housing. But the mentors and the people that I met during my local government experience are still very important mentors to me and very critical in my path. So that is a huge benefit too of just, meeting people and getting your foot in the door.
Okay, next question. Can an external candidate request or ask for local government employees to refer them to local government jobs? And that was from John Sim.
I also saw that email or that question come in earlier. It's my understanding that we do not take referrals, and I think that's the case for most local jurisdictions. And a lot of that is because the application process, as I was describing, is really grounded in going through sort of the civil service procedures to vetting candidates and then hiring them. And so there is, unlike the private sector where sometimes there's internal referral candidates, there's not a formal referral process. I will say that a lot of local government folks who find local government jobs are often through word of mouth and sharing with networks. And often folks who are new to applying to local government jobs really need somebody to kind of help nudge them into actually finding the job posting and then kind of walking through the wonkiness of the application process. And so it's kind of like an informal kind of referral. It's really just kind of knowing someone who's done it before, and that's a huge benefit for candidates who are applying.
All right, next.
I just have one quick thing to add to what Jamie has already said. I think that's, the only possible, flexibility around that is probably if you're going after like an exempt position, there might be some flexibility in terms of, using a connection to connect yourself with like an opportunity or like an opening in the city. It's not a formal process at all, and it's not very common. But I think that would be the only area where referrals may come into play.
All right, thank you for those responses. Next question from Majida Wesley. How should one manage going through the hiring process for multiple positions? For instance, how transparent should you be with departments as you navigate through the hiring process? If one job pays more, should you take the offer based on pay or negotiate with the department where you prefer the nature of the work?
I can respond. So it kind of depends on how far along you are in the process. If you've already passed the first interview and the second interview and they're offering you the job with the offer letter, I think that's really your time to negotiate. Oftentimes we don't, put the value of ourselves enough. And so, it doesn't, they've already given you the offer letter. So, at that point, you have really nothing to lose because they want you, they want to hire you. And if you at least, state that, you want to negotiate what step you're coming in, I would just say go for it. But, also be reasonable and don't ask for something that's too much because they do have a budget to keep. And if unless you're that far in the process, I would almost hesitate to bring that up. If you've already gone through the first interview and you're feeling confident, I would just wait until you're further along when you're kind of locked in, because you don't want to come across as too arrogant with the hiring manager.
Yeah, I would agree with all of Jen's comments. I think if you're in the process of applying to multiple jobs and you're actually really considering all of them, I think it's totally fine. You don't necessarily have to tell the other department or whatever that you're also applying to other jobs. If you do get kind of late in the round of any of these job paths and the hiring manager sort of indicates that you would likely be getting a job offer, I think that's maybe the time where you can share that you have potentially other opportunities. And then that will help sort of encourage them to maybe sharpen their pencils on that job offer letter. And if there's, if it's a strong variance in terms of salary for your options, I think it's okay to communicate that. Say you want the job that's maybe lower paying, but at a place that you like better. I think it's perfectly fine to ask if there was any way that they could sort of increase the salary or the offer that they initially provided. I think there is sort of this myth that's out there that you can't negotiate with local government positions, and to some extent it's true in that you can't really, unlike the private sector where they can sometimes make pretty big swings in what they offer. I think there is always some wiggle room. And, as young people, and folks who are really trying to build our careers, as Jen said, I always encourage you to go back and see if there's any sort of wiggle room that they can offer, especially if you do have an offer letter in hand. And if you have any specific questions, I've gone through several sort of personal experiences myself, and so I could give you tips. Just feel free to email me or email City Hall Fellows, and we can definitely follow up.
And to expand on a concept Jen mentioned, steps. I don't think we touched on that in the presentation. But basically, for most city jobs or local government jobs, there's a salary range for a different classification. And when you're hired, you are placed into different steps, which are bins within a classification that govern how much someone earns. So ideally, you'd want to come in at a higher step within that salary range. And as you get more experience, you have the opportunity to go up into a new step and increase your salary within that salary range. Next question. Um, do we have any advice for folks who are 10 years into careers related to public service, but not directly under city and county and have been through grad school?
I mean, one thing I can say that just from, things that I've heard is that, as much as the civil service process is extremely, rigid, in addition to signing up for email alerts on classifications, being networked into the folks that are actually working in the departments you're interested in is also really useful. And, you can get heads up through your network. So I think it was mentioned before, but, grabbing coffee with people who are doing work that you're interested in still is useful. And even if though they can't necessarily refer you, they can help set you up so that you apply on time and know when a job is coming available and, what those job requirements might be. So I think that would be helpful.
And the process, the other thing to add, the process for applying for the jobs, as folks have talked about already, doesn't necessarily change based on your years of experience, whether you're exempt or not, or whether you have networks in the departments that you want to work in. That might be a little bit different if you have 10 years experience or 1 year experience, but the process will look the same regardless. It just might be easier to meet some of the minimum qualifications.
And it might still be very time consuming. And
Yeah.
Some people wait, I've known some like mid-career folks who waited a couple of years to get a role that they wanted or something in government.
All right, and that was a question from Mac. Next question from Chelsea Corbin. How are public policy and public administration viewed differently in the public sector?
Well, I'll just say public administration, I think of it more as like the public equivalent of a business degree. It's really focused on kind of a management skills and learning and an analysis of operational things, budget things, that will help you, in terms of managing an organization that runs on a lot of personnel, performing, various tasks around the city. So that could be like running a department. A public policy degree probably prepares you less to run a department than to work as an analyst, as a legislative analyst, or something where you're really looking at the impact on the city of changing the law and changing the policies, and what that fiscal impact might be for the city. I don't know if someone else wants to add to that.
I guess I would just say that, so in my line of work, I do a lot of environmental compliance. And so we have lots of laws and regulations that are passed at the state level. So an example of that would be, there's a Senate bill that requires all California water utilities to test California schools for lead, and that was an aftermath of what happened in Flint, Michigan. And so that's an example of a public policy Senate bill. And so public administration kind of comes down to the local level. Well, okay, how do we implement that? And so it's really kind of where the rubber meets the road. It's about the coordination it takes for staff here at the local level to administratively contact the schools, set up appointments, to conduct water sampling, and to actually implement the policy. And so a lot of times legislators, lawmakers, they don't kind of think about how policies get implemented. And so that's kind of where our job kind of comes in, and where we implement the law and make sure that it's actually applied, maybe it's enforced, and create programs that comply with the law.
Okay. How do most people get into local government, and what are some common entry-level jobs?
I will say that I think all of our experience getting into local government was to start off with a postgraduate program. For me specifically, it was City Hall Fellows. I started working for local government right out of college, and if it weren't for City Hall Fellows, I probably wouldn't really have understood what it means kind of to work for a local government department. So that was my sort of entry point in. There are a lot of programs like City Hall Fellows. There's an Urban Fellows program in New York. The Coro Fellows in Public Affairs is a similar program. So there are several sort of 1-year gap year programs that place folks in local government departments for them to sort of get experience working on local government projects. I think that's a great opportunity to make connections and also just to kind of decide whether or not it's a good place, kind of a good situation and work environment for you. I will say that entry level jobs. So it depends when you say entry level. It could mean folks who are maybe just out of college, or folks who are just new to local government. If you're new to local government and you do have work experience, several years of work experience, yeah, don't hesitate to apply to job classifications that require those number of years. Just because you're new to local government doesn't necessarily mean you need to apply for positions that are for folks that don't require a lot of work experience. If you are a few years out of college, or maybe one year or so out of college, earlier in my presentation, I shared sort of a list of and I can actually pull up the slide, a list of classifications in San Francisco that apply for what I would consider entry level. So if folks can see the screen, is that the right slide?
And Jamie, would you know what those are, what their names are that might be reflected in other cities' job advertisements as well?
Yeah, so in San Francisco, they're called like junior administrative analysts. Sort of that would be probably similar for other jurisdictions as well. So you would have to take a look at that respective city's sort of job requirements. In San Francisco, we call sort of entry-level analysts the 1820 series. So the 1820, 1840, 5601s and 5602s are sort of entry-level analysts. And those are the ones that really, positions that require maybe only 1 to 2 years of work experience.
And Jamie, can someone go on that? Is there that classification compensation database? Does that also have like a listing? Is there somewhere they can go to find a listing of all the different types of classifications so that they kind of know what to be on the lookout for, even if there's not an opening right now?
Yeah, so in the classification compensation database, there is, sorry, let me make sure that, sorry, it's having issues kind of going back and forth between screens, but if you click that link, it'll take you to the HR website. There's a PDF actually that is comprehensive of all classifications, and you should be able to search from there, kind of years of experience.
In general, I would say that, that's like those lists of classifications should be public record, and you should be able to search for them like on any, for any public organization. And or you could reach out to them for a list if for some reason it's not posted. And generally just like administrative analyst or management assistant or analyst, those are probably good things to search for or be on the lookout for.
Yep, that's right. Yeah, I would look for, junior or if it's mid-career, senior administrative analyst. Yeah, any sort of, there's a lot of public service sort of aides too. So these are folks who may be coming in for, who are part-time interns, for example. There are classifications for those. So
Aren't there
yeah,
some
I
like
can't speak.
aren't there some trainee kind of
Yeah.
positions? You know what those are?
Yeah,
Go ahead,
go
Jen.
ahead, Marie.
I was gonna just add that it's the 99 series. I think they retired a few of them, but I think the 99, 20, and 22 still exist. And it's a step more junior to some of these entry level 18 series analyst positions. But I believe so individuals who are recent grads with no formal professional work experience would qualify for this 99 trainee series.
Thanks, Marie.
All right. And last question from Logan. Can anyone speak at all to the role of technology, specifically data analytics and data science in local government? Additionally, what sorts of roles should someone interested in that be looking out for? And I guess I can tackle that. I think you'll find that local government is very data driven because we are responsible for programs that are important for the public at large. We do rely on quality data and accurate analysis. So some specific classifications for city and county of SF, you'll definitely want to be on the lookout for the 1820 series. So that's the core analyst track, 1820, 1822, and 1824. And also the 1050 series, which are the IS business analysts. Those are typically a little bit more technical in terms of building data systems and warehouses and that type of stuff. But generally, so I work for the performance division at SFMTA, and we manage a huge array of data from all of our on-time performance, arrivals, departures from stations, and we're definitely looking for quality young individuals who can help manage that. So
I think I can speak to a little bit from like a more citywide perspective and drawing from my former capacity in the mayor's budget office. I know that the last kind of normal budget season that we had when we were in good economic times, there was a push, a citywide push to strengthen data, kind of that data technical capacity in all departments. So the classification that Michael mentioned, the 1050 series, the 1052, the 1053, business, kind of IS business technician types were sort of added into a lot of departmental budgets, and I also learned that I think the hiring and onboarding recruitment process was slightly amended to kind of expedite and boost recruitment for that sort of classification across the city. Of course, times are a little bit different now, so I'm not sure if where they are in accomplishing that goal. But I think if that's something that you are a good fit for, and you have that skill set and that experience, I think the city very recently did pursue an initiative to recruit individuals with that background. And I think you might actually, of course, once times are a little bit more stable economically, I think there might actually be a bit more straightforward avenue into those positions.
Okay, so we are at time. So just wanted to say, Jamie, do you want to take this away?
Sure. Thanks, Michael, for taking all the questions, and thank you all for submitting them. We're just over 7:30. I want to thank you all for joining. This is really the first time the City Hall Fellows has really done a webinar like this, and we know that it's really valuable for folks who are looking to stay on in local government capacities, but also looking to enter it, enter the workforce for the first time. Please feel free to visit our website at cityhallfellows.org to learn more about what we do as a nonprofit. If you have any questions, feel free to email us. There are several ways to stay connected. You can subscribe to our email list and learn more about events like this and some of the work that we do by just going, hitting that link to our website. You can also friend us on social media. We do post a lot of updates and on what we're doing and all of just really interesting content now on Facebook. And we were also going to send out an email for ways where you can find the slide deck and get the video recording sometime in the future, and also just a survey of how you think we did. But thank you all again for joining. Thank you to all the speakers for participating. And we hope that everyone stays healthy and well.